Hello! In this lecture, we will learn about writing a counterargument essay. At any point, you may stop, take notes, and continue playing this video. Let's begin. So, for the second unit in our class, you will be writing a counterargument paper. What is the purpose of writing a counterargument essay, or why use a counterargument in an assignment overall? Will it weaken the position? Not really. Using a counterargument paper makes your argument a lot stronger because it gives you the chance to respond to your reader's objections once they've finished reading. So you're able to explain these are specific oppositions that a reader might consider, think, or argue against my point, and you're able to refute those opposing viewpoints. It also shows that you are a reasonable person who is looking at both sides of an argument, thus making you more of a credible writer. When you present a counterargument, you want to make sure that you're presenting it in an unbiased manner. So, in a well-written counterargument paper, you're not just writing one or two sentences as to what someone might say when they're opposing your viewpoint. You're actually going into an opposing viewpoint in depth, and you're providing clear discussions, at times, clear, sorry, I had a brain fart, and at times, you're providing clear discussions and evidence from outside sources to support the counterargument, which later you will refute. And you're probably considering, well, where do I put the counterargument in my paper? And there are various ways you can write or develop the organization of a counterargument paper. And here are a few. The first is the most common, and we're looking at the first example here. In the first example, or in method 1, you would have your introduction with a thesis statement, as you typically are familiar with. And you would have maybe 2 to 3 supporting paragraphs that support your thesis statement. And then in one paragraph, you would write the counterargument. The following paragraph, you would have the rebuttal, which you would argue against the counterargument, and then a conclusion. And again, this is the most common method, but this isn't the only method you can use when organizing a counterargument paper. You can present a point-by-point method, and method 2 kind of outlines that. So you would still have your thesis in the introduction, but in each body paragraph, you could potentially present, this is a contradiction. This is what someone might say when they're arguing against my thesis statement. You would provide some background research, support it, but then you would refute it and explain why this opposing viewpoint doesn't necessarily hold any validity or isn't necessarily holding any merit in the discussion you're presenting. And you would do this point by point. So in every body paragraph, you would have a counter-argument, rebuttal, and a support. And the final method is the third method, which is the flipped method. Instead of ending with your counter-argument and rebuttal, you would actually begin your paper with the counter-argument. So your introduction would be the counter-argument. And your second paragraph or your first body paragraph would be the rebuttal, and then the following paragraphs would be supporting paragraphs to your thesis statement, and you'd end with a conclusion. It is important to note that in any method, the rebuttal and the conclusion are 2 separate paragraphs. You'd never want to end a counter-argument paper with just the rebuttal. You have to have a separate concluding paragraph to end the essay overall. I've provided some examples as to how you would use these methods, and you'll be able to access those later in Unit 2. So when you're presenting your argument, you're also going to consider developing a thesis statement. So writing a thesis statement for a counter-argument essay, I'd like you to consider writing your thesis statement so that you're presenting a little bit of counter-argument within the thesis statement. So for the essay number 2, I'd like your thesis to consider or to include your position, how you're supporting it, and a hint of counter-argument. I would like to take some time to define a working thesis. A working thesis is essentially just a work in progress. And that means that at some point, or most likely, your thesis is going to change. Your thesis might change just in the word choices that you're using. Maybe you'll you write your thesis statement so it's more formal, more descriptive, or your thesis might change in the sense that you're actually flipping what you were arguing and you're now arguing for the opposition. And that's totally fine. But you have to remember that whatever you choose to write, for an argumentative paper, you always have to have a thesis statement or a working thesis statement, because that's going to guide the entire argument of your essay. So for this essay assignment, I'd like you to consider writing a thesis statement or a working thesis, or starting off with a working thesis statement that again presents the position, supports, and a hint of counter-argument. And here are a few examples that I've prepared for you. So let's look at each. In example number 1, it states, while most parents believe that gifting pets to children is irresponsible, being a caregiver for a pet allows children to develop important social skills and promotes an active lifestyle. Ultimately, it is the parent's responsibility to ensure a child is properly caring for a pet. So in this first thesis example, we have the argument. Can you guess where the position is in this thesis statement? The position is found here in the highlighted portion. So overall, what this paper is going to be arguing is that it is okay for children to receive pets as gifts. It would be a terrifying thing to happen, to me anyway, but the reason why it's because it's the parent's responsibility. Like if you're a parent and you're gifting your child a pet, it is ultimately your responsibility. So here it's presenting the position and the supports, but it's also including a hint of counter-argument, which is right here. Some people might believe that it's not okay to give kids pets as gifts. And that's showing the opposition, but then it's also showing the writer's position and his or her supports. Let's look at the second example. Although many Americans believe that capital punishment should be abolished, the death penalty should remain as a punishment by law, as it deters potential murderers and criminal activities. This thesis statement is a little bit more straightforward because it provides a more linear presentation of the argument. First, it provides a hint of counter-argument. This is what some people think. This is what the opposition believes. Then it presents the actual argument. The death penalty should not be made illegal. It should continue on. And then the supports. Why should it continue? Why should it not be made illegal? It deters potential murderers and criminal activities. Let's review the third example. While many argue that parents are at fault for the childhood obesity epidemic in America, the food industry should be held responsible as it directly advertises fat, sugary, high-caloric diets to children. So here we have a hint of counter-argument, which is the opposition. Some people think it's actually the parents who are responsible for childhood obesity in the United States. However, the real issue is it's actually the food industry who should be held responsible. Why? Because, and here are the supports. It's advertising fat, sugary, high-caloric diets to children. So here I've provided 3 different examples of thesis statements that have a clear position, a hint of counter-argument, and supporting factors to support the position overall. None of these thesis statements are 100% perfect, and I wanted to highlight that in the sense that they are working thesis statements. At some point they will be revised to encapsulate more of a formal tone that would adhere to the academic language for an English 3 class. But I think these are good thesis statements to begin with as a draft. Now, once you've developed your thesis statement, it's important to consider the next steps of the assignment. So when you're beginning your counterargument essay, it's always important to review the assignment prompt. Review the requirements and the limitations for this essay. So go back and review the assignment page and make sure that your thesis statement is clearly developed, or it's clearly holding a position. So develop a stance and brainstorm ideas and topics that you can use to support your stance, and also brainstorm ideas that essentially oppose your stance. So you can use those in the counterargument portion of your paper. Also consider how you're going to organize the paper overall. Excuse me. How you're going to organize the paper overall. Consider using an outline. So once you have an idea of what the prompt is asking, what your thesis statement is going to be, and how you plan on organizing the paper, consider different opposing viewpoints. So remember, a counterargument should address the ideas that you have already presented. So if you're presenting two important ideas in two different supporting paragraphs, the opposition in your essay or the counterargument paragraph should directly go back to those two supporting points and explain why they're not valid. So essentially, you're creating a conversation within your paper. What you're not doing is presenting three different ideas that don't relate to each other. What I would like to see you do in this paper is to say, like, I'm supporting the argument by X, Y, and Z. And then in your opposition paragraph or your counter-argument paragraph, you're saying X, Y, and Z are invalid because, or whatever reason. So essentially, you're addressing the supports. You're counter-arguing what you've already said. When doing so, you want to make sure that you're unbiased. You want to make sure that you are offering an intellectual sound argument, that you're not purposefully making the counter-argument weak because it'll be easier to refute it later. You want to make sure that you're providing clear opposing viewpoints and to provide descriptive details within that counter-argument. Your rebuttal paragraphs, in turn, should do the same. They should directly address the counter-argument. So the purpose of a rebuttal is to refute the opposing viewpoints or the counter-argument in the paper. Remember to begin your topic sentences with transitions to allow your readers to see, okay, we're going back to supporting my argument, or to supporting the writer's argument. And here are some ways you could potentially begin the topic sentences for the rebuttal. Some might believe, the opposition might say, the other side thinks, or many people are in agreement that, so and so. And here are a couple of ways that you can begin a rebuttal. You can admit that the other point has, that the other side has a point, but that their logic is faulty. And here's an example. Many people believe the answer to texting while driving is to use hands-free devices. Admittedly, this is a feasible option and may be better than traditional hands-on texting. However, the driver is still suffering from cognitive distraction of performing another task while driving. So here, we're saying, like, yeah, this is a good point to bring up. It's valid. However, it's not really solving our problem, or it's not solving any of the issues when you're a distracted driver. Another way you can begin a rebuttal is just to automatically shoot the opposition down. So you can shoot them down and explain how they're wrong. Some believe that texting while driving with hands-free devices is the answer to ban texting. However, it has been proven that this is not the actual process of texting while driving that distracts the driver. It is the cognitive distraction, or the thinking required in order to complete the task, that distracts drivers. So here, the writer directly just explained why the counter-argument was invalid. So you have two ways to address a rebuttal, or to create a rebuttal. One way to address the counter-argument is to say, okay, yeah, I see the point, that's valid. However, and then point to the logic and how it doesn't really make sense to the point you're trying to argue. Or you can just directly shoot down the opposition and say, no, this is not something that we should consider because of X, Y, and Z, or whatever reasons. I provided an example rebuttal